or whether they want someone to choose for them. You know, for God's sake, you do it. And the more difficult the problem, I guess, the greater the tendency toward that. And I think the bomb lends itself to that. We also, as with any serious thing, we tend to call people who talk about it crazy. All the abolitionists of slavery were crazy. You know, the Grimke sisters were crazy, and Garrison was crazy. They're all crazy. Right up till 1860, they were all called crazy because in the main we couldn't imagine such a profound change because such a major part of our economy was founded on it, you know. Besides that, we weren't sure what these things were, you know, these black people. I think I don't think blasé is the right word. I think John Culver's a great man, and his loss in the U.S. Senate is a terrible loss for all the people. But I think our emotions about it are a far more complicated range than that. It's complicated. It is a major part of human freedom. Michael Bakunin, who wrote extensively on this, said that of all combinations of power, the most dangerous would be to place power in a single hand over all economic and political affairs. Because then the people not only have the threat of the gun, but the need for the bread from the same hand. At another level, I agree with the early Americans, and not the rich ones, who thought that the right to possess physical necessities was essential to individual freedom, that without them there's no choice. The law in its majestic equality prohibits the rich as well as the poor from sleeping under bridges, begging in the streets, stealing bread. Now, with all that, it seems, and those are perhaps the outer limits, it seems clear to me that the phenomena of the multinational corporation is devastating to freedom in every way you can think of. It not only picks up families and breaks them up in the process and moves them wherever it wants to any old day, closes this plant, opens this plant, spills out products that it conditions us to want, whether we need them or not. Civilizations, the proliferation of unnecessary necessities. It deals with authoritarian governments in a way that is terrible for the people who live there, and for it induces revolution. The dialogue within multinationals is to move beyond the control of government always. It's no coincidence that 500 major corporations are homed in Bermuda, because you start looking at Bermuda law and it just says, have your way. They want to move out from regulation, but the idea that you can do the most important things that need to be done for society in the future for a profit won't bear analysis. Let's look at the phenomenon of the elderly poor for a moment. At the time that Ben Franklin was described as that marvelous machine and spirit built to last for a century or more, out of 3.5 million Americans, there were fewer than 5,000 that reached 75, we think. In 1900, 3% of our population was over 65. Today, it's almost 14%. That's a revolution. By the year 2000, it's going to be over 18%, and that's not very far away. It's going to be largely unemployed, and as an age group post-majority, it's going to be the poorest. And the cost of nursing home care where you don't have a family and where you can't take care of yourself far exceeds, $55 a day, $65 a day, their ability to pay. That's all. You can't make a profit at it. They can't pay you what it costs you to provide the service they need. Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be. The question is whether we can imagine the variety of ways that give the elderly respect and love and a place that's warm and surrounded by people that care for them. Even children, maybe, instead of 15,000 older people off segregated by themselves. Whether we can find ways of helping fund that. I mean, we talk about economic freedom, and then you begin to look at the Internal Revenue Code. And you realize that its impact is absolutely stunning all through there. Anytime you want to identify the sources of economic power in this society, measure who's not fully taxed. They have it. The impact of taxation on all this, and taxation rarely used as an instrument of social policy, is profound. So I guess I think that simple labels like economic freedom can mislead. That we need a more sophisticated analysis, but that the continuing exploitation of labor and natural resources from poor countries would endanger all life. Through war and undermining of the ecological basis of the planet. And whether we like it or not, we're going to be the victims or the master of change, and we better grab hold of it before it does us in. Boeing likes to make B-1 bombers, and Grumman likes to make the F-14, and they'll make all we'll buy. And technology does not make moral judgment. That's the thing that broke Oppenheimer's heart when he finally observed that science has known sin. Society has to make moral judgments and apply it very sensitively to technology, or that which could relieve humanity from its whole history of want will destroy it. And free choice through democratic institutions is the only way sensitive and subtle enough to express all the needs and all the views and all the aspirations of all the people. Yeah, I wish I would ask some questions so I could show that I don't always make such long statements. But there's no way to answer, I mean, if we really want to try to answer a question like that, except by talking for a while. You know, we need to learn and understand. We need to look at a Kelso and see if his ideas about corporate ownership by those who work there have meaning and to what extent they do. We need to examine whether the idea of corporate democracy is valid, or whether management, the top 500 in the country, there are only a half a dozen where management owns 5%. But they're the ones who decide who to give the political contributions to. Might be my money as a stockholder, but I got no say. Not to mention their decision as whether to make a new form of tank or anti-tank gun or something like that when I'm a peacenik. But we need to look at corporate democracy. We need to look at size. We need to make fundamental decisions. When a Chrysler situation comes up, we need to ask ourselves why in this society we produce more cars than babies in each of the last 15 years. Much as I love babies and dislove cars, too much of each. What are we going to do with them? Los Angeles has been 1/3 pavement for a generation now. And you get vapor lock on the freeway. And we're killing ourselves all over the place. And who needs it? But are we afraid to choose? Are we really going to just pour billions more? We were talking about Chrysler briefly at dinner, and someone quoted Dirksen as having said, well, you know, it's just a billion, but those billions add up, something like that. I think unemployment is a great personal human tragedy. I don't think Studs Terkel's people are kidding at all when they sometimes said they felt suicidal. Coming home that night's pretty darn hard, you know. The oldest daughter could have started college next year, and now there's not even a job. So do we build napalm? No. We have to choose. And I think we need always, on all these issues, the foreign policy issue and the corporate issue and the others, to consider the political process. We do believe in democratic institutions, but we don't act that way. We don't vote. We don't really participate. But democratic institutions are going to have to address some of these problems. I think, you know, we need to support those who dare to speak out in corporations, but the fact is that we socially ostracize them. Not just in government, but in the corporation. We have to examine our value patterns. I guess I think that the two great perils, the two great character flaws are violence and materialism. And that materialism is a very great threat to our survival. That we really need to step back and wonder whether we could just enjoy the five senses the good Lord gave us a little more, rather than having this passion for things. Because underlying the corporate phenomena is our materialism. It's a character trait that's nurtured by enormous industries in this society. Our little children crying and fighting because they don't get a toy they want, usually a toy gun. And I finally think we ought to try to move towards smallness. I really believe that there's higher efficiency. The highest form of efficiency is the spontaneous cooperation of a few free people, because they can do it better there. They really can. The idea that size and efficiency goes together is wrong. It's the economic power of big that crushes the little. It's not a better product made for less money. Finally, and I think this is essential, that we have to come to economic planning. The idea that spontaneous, independent decision-making about fundamental economic matters, just like little sparks all over the place, is going to produce what people need and distribute it as they need it, won't work. Look at the pharmaceutical companies. Look at thalidomide. Why is it that you can't drive from the airport to the city in any third world major city without seeing the pharmaceutical companies there? Generally selling pharmaceuticals that are banned in the United States. That's pretty serious stuff. I think it's going to be difficult. It's going to be complicated. We'll make a lot of mistakes, like the Grumman bus. But we're going to have to do a lot more economic planning, and we're really going to have to learn to enjoy more things. We haven't all heard the late quartets of Beethoven yet. We haven't finished reading Mencius or planted an apple tree. There are more good things to do than we can ever get done, but we're too busy shopping. Can everybody hear these questions? In my opinion, what is the major cause of the protraction of the holding of our hostages in Iran? I like to be skeptical, but once in a while there's something I think I really understand. And the major cause, clearly, was the emotion of the people in Iran. The power of public opinion is amazing. Stokely Carmichael had it all wrong. It's not power to the people. The power is in the people. The point is they don't use it very much. The people of Iran did a very remarkable thing. I had wondered in my gloom for years whether it was possible in modern times, with the enormous firepower of the military, for a people subjected to a military government to free themselves. And I'd watched Hungary and Czechoslovakia and dozens of other places. I don't mean to pick on one block. And it seemed like time was about the only thing that worked out. I didn't see how you overcome all that firepower. Now, the Shah had an army in proportion to the population in terms of its equipment. He bought $17 billion worth of arms from the United States between 1972 and 1978. He had more F-5s, 7s, 14s, 15s, 16s, and 18s, and F-111s in possession or on order than any government in the world except the U.S. He had more tanks than the British Army. He had an Imperial Guard that was so well paid and so elite, and people respect those who pay them well and make them elite. He had a Savak that pervaded the countryside, that tortured tens of thousands of people, literally, and I mean tortured, killed them, broke their bodies. There was no guerrilla warfare. In 1978, there weren't a dozen soldiers killed by snipers or bombs. There are more than that in Ireland in this year already. The people took to the streets, and by nonviolent protest, the Shah killing as many as he dared, probably 50,000 in 1978, forced him to leave. People said there should have been a coup. There'd been a coup since 1953. What's a coup within a coup? English songbird or something. The last prime minister that he had before Bakhtiar was the chief of staff for the military. And he killed as many as he dared. How many do you dare kill? On Black Friday, in a place like Jolly Square, American-made Huey helicopters that we've heard of before with 50 caliber machine guns mounted in the bays flew less than 100 feet over crowds and just fired bullets at them. And the blood was thick on the cobblestones there for days. I flew into Tehran while the Shah was still there, about 3 weeks after the general strike had begun, and the times I'd been there before, there's always this ugly smog pall over the place, and you couldn't. There's a great mountain to the east that rises over 16,000 feet. You could see it, and the air was crystal clear. And driving in, I realized that there was no traffic, usually a huge traffic jam. The factories were still. The offices were closed. The shops were closed. The schools were closed. The bazaar. There were 2 million people out on the street in a city the size of Chicago, and everything was closed and had been for weeks. There's not much an army can do about that. And the people, as we saw on television, I think I was participating in one way or another in every major civil rights and peace demonstration from the late 50s to the mid-70s. And you could lose in the alleyways of the demonstrations in Iran all those people put together. The biggest we had was barely over 300,000, the March on Washington, where Dr. King made his I Have a Dream speech. A couple of million out in one city and millions all over the country. And the people were very, very angry and very upset. And when the Shah left, they suddenly realized something that they couldn't quite believe because they'd been marching with their shrouds on so they could be buried easy. It wasn't bravado or macho. They weren't shooting back at the helicopters. They realized they had power. And for all their fear and much greater fear of the Soviet Union, because it's there, you know, they can see. Their anger was at the United States because they believed that we had imposed the Shah on them. They believed, that many of them, that there had been leadership that was working toward democratic institutions. That Mossadegh, who we couldn't understand, we didn't like him, he seemed wild. Read Dean Acheson's descriptions of Mossadegh in Present at the Creation. Only a wasp would title a book by that name. And he couldn't understand this man. Who is this wild man come to Washington? The people, I think the hostage taking was a happening. I don't think history will be able to come to any other conclusion. I think the people that went in there were from a wide range of segments, and I think the miracle was that they didn't start shooting at each other and hit some hostages when they were in there. And I think the hostages were in great danger right at the beginning and for some time thereafter, because any kind of wildness could take place, and there were guns all over the place. But the history of the revolution was a history of resistance. And the thing that brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power was not the people's knowledge of him because they didn't know him. It was because he was the symbol of the most consistent and outspoken resistance to the Shah and to the superpowers. And he symbolized that spirit of resistance. And when the hostages were taken, a strange psychology set in. I haven't talked with an Iranian who would argue that there was any justification for taking the hostages. I realize that there's some who've argued that some were spies. What's the justification for holding the others? And it would have to be the dumbest spy in the world to be operating from the U.S. Embassy in November 1979 because the place had been surrounded by people yelling and screaming for months. And to get in or out was worth your skin. You couldn't spy from in there. It'd be impossible. It'd be the worst place in the world. You couldn't find out anything. Literally. I could go into a lot more detail about that. People had to come in and tell them what was going on. But once the hostages were taken, they became the palpable, the tangible way of showing defiance and resistance to the United States. They would hold them and we would shout, "Let our people go," and they could say no. And just as some may not want to think about the bomb, they couldn't think about why they were holding these poor people, what they had to do with it. There was great pain felt that we never seemed to care very much about all the torture, about all the deaths, about all the violence. They saw it as being from our guns. Very much as the situation with Vietnam, I think they didn't believe that we conceded their common humanity. And so no leadership, in my opinion, Ayatollah Khomeini and the rest, would dare to have defied public opinion. And many worked from the beginning really with great cleverness to get the hostages released. But until the people would permit it. There had just been an election. It was an incredible election. 70-odd people ran, and millions and millions voted. And the people were still in the streets all the time, marching. The economy had gone to pot. And then we, I think, did that, but the main thing was public opinion there, but we inflamed public opinion. If there was anything that was clear, it was that they would not submit to force. It was psychologically impossible for them to submit to force because they'd just been through that for a long, long time, and they'd lost lots of relatives and friends and maybe a piece of their own skin. And we began to try to force them economically. The idea that people who would defy death would submit to an economic sanction is not well thought out. The cost of the hostage-taking to Iran is just stunning. The cost in turbulence, the cost to the total economy, the cost in outright dollars is just stunning. It's one of those enormous human tragedies from every standpoint. But it's awfully important that we try to understand it because it will happen wherever people live under tyranny for a long time. It's awfully quiet.
Simple question, I hope. What are you going to do in Angola?
I'm going to meet with Sean McBride and some others. He's an old friend from Ireland, and try to examine the effect of apartheid on Namibia and Botswana and Mozambique and Angola, and try perhaps in a way to do what a young woman back there asked earlier, what can an individual do about our foreign policy? In his book, The Court Years, Justice Douglas writes that he had introduced DM to Jack Kennedy when he was a senator. He called him Jack. I never called him Jack. He then concluded that he knew DM was in danger and would regret all of his life that he didn't go to warn him, and added, "We killed him." That's a direct quote. "We killed him." Well, I'm going to go and see what seems to be going on. my concern is that this administration, it's something it's not personal to these individuals entirely, will support the apartheid government of South Africa. That government is doomed to failure. I don't like that. But as sure as Alan Paton ever wrote a word, there's no way that that form of tyranny can prevail. And you can see it in the eyes and the faces of all the people. And those who care about peace and freedom and dignity need to work for ways of achieving nonviolent transitions from tyranny to freedom in which we can hope to live together.